Hello, so we continue with our lesson. Like I told you that we are going to start with the diagram of a capillary bed. We're just from looking at capillaries and just from telling you that the capillaries, these are smallest blood vessels. They form a link between arteries and veins. So this is something that you are supposed to know. And I told you to say that as arteries approach the organ of the body, they branch into smaller arteries called arterioles. This is the reason why this part here, this part that you are able to see, this one, this is called an arteriole. We get to call it an arteriole. This is an arteriole. So maybe you may be asking yourself, what is an arteriole? What you need to understand is that arterioles are small branches of arteries that lead to capillaries. Have you seen? These ones are leading to capillaries. And this part that is here, this is called a what? Like a vein. Now this one is called a what? Venule. Where this one gets to lead to veins. So you ask yourself, what is a venule? You need to understand that venules are small vessels that collect blood from capillaries and transport it to veins. So these ones are collecting blood from this capillary. This is called a capillary bed, and they are transporting it to the what? To the veins. So you need to understand the blood that is entering this capillary bed via arteriole, and this one, the blood is going to veins from this capillary bed via the what? Venule. So these are two important parts that you need to understand. You discover that this venule gets to facilitate the return of deoxygenated blood to the heart. So you discover that these ones get to serve as an conduit of correcting blood from this capillary network. So they collect blood and transport it to the what? To the veins. But these ones, they just do what? They are just small, like small arteries that lead to the what? To the capillaries. Their function is just to regulate blood flow into the capillary bed. So they are just regulating the blood flow into this capillary bed. So these are some things that you are supposed to know. So let us finish labeling this part. Have you seen this thing that is here? I just want you to understand. This thing here, inside there, you get to find a fluid. So there, you get to find a fluid. Inside here, we get to find a certain fluid. And the name of that fluid that is found there is called lymph fluid. But this thing, this is called, we get to call it lymphatic, or we just call it lymph vessel. So you can call it lymphatic vessel or lymph vessel. Inside the lymphatic vessel, you get to find lymphatic fluid. So sometimes you're going to find some things here, then they tell you what is the name of that fluid. It is called lymphatic fluid. Then we've got these bodies that you're able to see, these ones, the ones that are there. These ones are what we get to call what? Red blood cells. These ones are called red blood cells. That is why after this lesson, after when we are done with this part, we are going to start with blood, where we are going to look at those red blood cells very well. So I just want you to understand this. These things get to come in an exam. So these that you are able to see, they are more like the joining parts, they are more like broken. This is what we get to call a capillary. It is called a capillary. This is what is called this thing here. This is what we get to call as a capillary. Have you seen? They are like these broken things. This is how they look. So you discover that inside here at this part there, we get to have another fluid. The name of that fluid, this fluid, not the one that is inside, the one that is there. The name of that fluid, we get to call it a tissue fluid. So it is a tissue what? Tissue fluid. That is what you are supposed to understand. It is called a tissue fluid. And these ones that are here, you are able to see these parts here. I've drawn these parts inside. There are some things there. That one is called tissue cells, these ones. So that thing there, that is called what? A tissue cell. It is called a tissue cell. So I just want you to understand all these parts that I'm listing and labeling. So these are the parts that you are supposed to understand under this particular capillary bed. So these are very important, and you need to make sure that you understand them even as we get to move forward. So I've told you, you may find some questions. What is the function of the arteriole there? So if you find such a question, I've told you that the function of those ones is just to do what? Is just to regulate. So they do what? Those ones, they just regulate. So it's just they just regulate blood flow. Them, they just regulate the blood what? They just regulate the blood flow into the capillary bed. Into the what? Into the capillary bed. So into the capillary, like this capillary beds. So this is what you need to understand. So that is just a cross section that I've just gotten. The key thing is just understanding the concept, and those ones that are there, I'm just from telling you that the function of those ones is just to do what? Is just to facilitate. They just facilitate. They just facilitate the return of what? Of deoxygenated blood. The return of the deoxygenated, you can finish this way, it is deoxygenated blood. So deoxygenated blood to the what? To the heart. Deoxygenated blood to the heart. So let me finish it. Let me put it, okay. To the what? To the heart. This is some parts that you need to understand. So I just want you to know this. I want you to understand all these things that I'm teaching you here. You get to find them in an exam. So I just want you to understand all these things. Even as we get to move forward, you are going to know this. You are going to understand. I'm going to explain all these things so that you will try to understand them. So when blood from the arterioles reaches the capillary bed, so when blood from these arterioles, when it reaches the capillary bed, so this is a capillary, the whole thing is what is making up what we are calling a capillary bed. So when it reaches this capillary bed, you need to understand that it is there is what we call a plasma, which is filtered out of the capillary into the spaces around the tissue cells. So it is filtered out into what we are calling the what we are calling the tissue cells. So this is an important point that we are supposed to write down. So let me do this. I don't know if we've written what is here. If I can love, I don't know if we've written this. So this is a wonderful point that you are supposed to know. So I just want you people to stay connected even as I teach you biology, even as we make this particular topic very simple. So I'm telling you to say that when blood, so I'm telling you to say that when blood from where? When blood from the arterioles. So when blood from the arterioles reaches, when it reaches the capillary bed. So I'll say when it reaches the capillary, when it reaches the capillary beds, what you are going to see is that the plasma, there is a plasma that is what? Filtered. A plasma is filtered out. So this plasma is filtered out of the what? Out of the capillaries. Out of the what? Out of the capillaries. This way here, you can finish it. That is capillaries. It is filtered out of the capillaries into the what? Into the spaces. Into the spaces around the what? Around the tissue cells. Where are the tissue cells there? Around the tissue cells. So the question you need to ask yourself, where are the tissue cells? Here, these are the tissue cells. So around the tissue cells, you now discover that the fluid around the tissue cells is what we are calling the tissue fluid. So this tissue fluid is the tissue around these tissue cells. These are cells. So the tissue around the cells is what we get to call the tissue fluid. And the tissue fluid has got a lot of function. So I've told you that the fluid, so the fluid around, that fluid around the tissue cells, that fluid around the tissue, what? The tissue cells is called, we are calling it what? We are calling it tissue fluid. It is called the tissue fluid. So it is called the what? It is called the tissue fluid. You get to call it tissue fluid. And what is the function of this same fluid? What is the function of that fluid? The function of the same tissue fluid, you discover that so some functions, this tissue fluid has got what? Functions. The functions of the tissue fluid. So I'll say the function of the tissue what? Tissue fluid. I guess you've heard something that is called the thermoregulation. So the function of these tissue fluids, what they get to do what? They are involved in what? Thermoregulation. So there's what we call thermoregulation. Thermoregulation, they maintain temperature. Have you seen? So thermo means heat. So regulation of heat of the what? Of the tissue cells. Of the tissue what? Tissue cells. So tissue cells. These are tissue cells. So the function of that tissue fluid is in the thermoregulation of the tissue cells. Apart from knowing that, is that they get to facilitate the exchange of materials between the blood and the tissue cells. So they get to do what? They get to facilitate. This is another beautiful point that you are supposed to know. So I've told you they get to do what? They get to facilitate. Facilitate. They get to do what? They get to facilitate the exchange. So they get to facilitate the exchange of materials. The exchange of what? The exchange of materials between what? Between the blood, and the what? And the tissue cells. So this is something important that you are supposed to know. So I told you that the capillaries are also, the whole function of these capillaries, you discover that they also facilitate in the exchange of materials where we talked about nutrients. So this is something that you are not hearing for the first time. This is something that I also touched at. So you just need to know and understand this. So you discover that the formation of these tissue fluids from blood is caused by a lot of factors that we need to consider. You discover that the way these tissue fluids are formed, there are certain factors that we need to consider. So the walls of the capillaries, we said that they are very thin. This is what we said, isn't it? The walls are very thin. So since the walls are very thin, that is the reason why there are certain formation of these tissue fluids. And I told you to say that the pressure of blood coming from the arteries or arterioles, the smallest arteries, we calling them arterioles, is higher than the pressure in the venule, where we now understand. So these are things that we already know. So I'm not just explaining from without. I told you that these ones, when you just hear this word, these are small arteries that get to be joined to the capillary what? The capillary bed. So here, this is just the same as an artery. This is the same as a vein. So these ones carry blood at a very high pressure. These ones carry blood at a low pressure. So when we talk about certain factors that contribute to the formation of these tissue fluids, these two dots, those dots, those are called tissue fluids. So the formation of those tissue fluids is contributed by the thin walls that this capillary has, and because of the pressure. So because of those things, you get to form these what we are calling the tissue fluids. So you discover that the red blood cells are not filtered out of the capillaries because they are large and rigid. Because of this, you discover that whenever we are talking about those red blood cells, so like you need to understand there are certain things here that I want you to know. I want you to know these things and I want you to understand them clearly. I guess we are writing. These ones are called cells. Specifically, we get to call these as what? Red blood cells. We are calling them what? Red blood cells. So these ones are not filtered out of the capillaries because they are what? Large. So I'm saying that the red blood cells cells are not filtered out. They are not filtered, so they are not filtered out of the capillaries. Of the what? Of the capillaries. Why? Capillaries, double L. Why? Because of what? Because, right forward, because of what? Because they are large. Because they are what? They are large. Since these ones are large, and we are saying that they are what? They are large, and there's a word I used, rigid. They are what? Large and rigid. This is the reason why they are not filtered out of this capillary. So these are important things that you need to understand. You discover that the phagocytes are able to change shape, and these ones get to move out of the capillaries. So the phagocytes, they are going to move out of these what? Out of these capillaries, the phagocytes. You know, phagocytes get to fight diseases. So this same thing we are calling the capillary bed, you discover that they get to be used in the immune system. So you know, the immune system, the ability of the body to, when we say, okay, what is immunity? Immunity is the ability of the body to resist diseases. So when we are talking about immunization, is a process by which the body is made resistant to certain diseases. So I talked about saying that there are phagocytes that get to change shape. These ones, since they get to change shape, they get to be filtered out of these capillaries. So this all information, you just need to make sure that you understand it very well. So you need to make sure that you understand this information very well. So from here now, we just now need to, and before we look at the blood, we now need to understand what we get to call, there are certain names. So there are certain names of what? Names of selected, we say names of selected what? Blood vessels. Certain names of selected blood vessels that you are supposed to understand. So certain names of selected blood vessels that you need to understand. For example, whenever we talk of an organ, so when we say, okay, an organ and a selected blood vessel. So I'm going to say a blood vessel this side. When I name an organ, then a blood vessel this side. So these are associated. So when we talk of organs that we've looked at, for example, when we go to the heart, so the associated selected blood vessel is that we've got what we call the coronary artery. This is the reason why we were talking about coronary diseases to deal with the heart. I don't know if people still remember. When we move to the lungs, you discover that they are the selected blood vessels. We've got what we call the pulmonary. So we get to say we've got the pulmonary artery. So pulmonary artery and what? Pulmonary veins. They are pulmonary what? Pulmonary veins. So pulmonary arteries and pulmonary what? Pulmonary veins. We've got the liver. So we are going to look at all these things. We did this, so we are remaining with this. All these things we are going to do them. So under the river, there are quite a lot. We get to talk about hepatic artery and vein, and what? Hepatic vein. Side this, you also need to understand there is what we call an hepatic portal vein. Portal vein, like this. Then lastly, when we go to the kidneys, so when we move to the kidneys, you need to understand that. So when we move to the kidneys, you need to understand that the selected blood vessel there, we've got what we call the renal artery, and renal vein. So it's a renal vein. This word there, that is vein. So this is the information that you are supposed to know. So I just want you to know this. I want you people to understand this. Away from this now, I told you that we are now looking at the blood now. We go to the blood. What we did, we talked about the heart. We talked about blood vessels. That is what we are just from talking about. And now we now go to the blood. We now move to the blood. So blood, this is something that is so simple. I guess you are going to enjoy this. We now go to the blood. First question, what is the blood first of all? So whenever we are talking about the blood, you just need to understand that we are talking about what? A tissue. What is blood? Blood, this is just what? This is a tissue. So we are just talking about a tissue that is made up of what? That is made up of white blood cells. White blood cells. It is made up of white blood cells, red blood cells, It is made up of plasma. We are going to look at all these things. It is also made up of what? They are what we call platelets. These ones, the last one. So platelets are also important. So when we go to white blood cells, these we looked at them. So the good part with biology is that these things are quite interrelated. So we talked about, we said that what is blood? Blood, we are just talking about a tissue that is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4 things. It's made up of white blood cells, red blood cells, plasma, and platelets. So now, what we need to know on white blood cells, we know that, okay, white blood cells, these ones are common when we are talking about white blood cells. So white blood cells, maybe most of you that were not there when we were doing cells, this is the reason why I'm even teaching about this. I will also explain even some things that we did so that we all try to understand. So whenever we are talking about white blood cells, we are talking about the cells that defend the body against diseases and infections. So these are what? These are cells. We are talking about cells that defend. Them, they do what? They defend. So the function is to defend the body. They defend the what? They defend the body against what? Against diseases. So they defend the body against diseases or infections. So or infections. This word is infections or infections. So they get to defend the body, or we can just say they fight diseases in the body. And you discover that they are made in the what? Bone marrow. So they are made, these ones, the white blood cells, they are what? They are made. They are made in what? In bone marrows. They are made in what? Bone marrows. They are made in what? Bone marrow. So you now discover that these ones, they are made in what? Bone marrows. they are made in lymph nodes, they are made in thymus, they are made in different parts, but these ones are the common ones. You discover now that we've got two types. We've got two types of white blood cells. We've got two types of white blood cells. Two types of white blood cells. These two types of white blood cells that I'm talking about, they are what we call, so one, there is what we get to call a phagocyte. So they are what we call phagocytes. And two, they are also what we call lymphocytes. Their function is to fight diseases in the body, but in the way they get to fight diseases in the body get to differ. This is the reason why we've got these ones. So we've got the phagocyte and the lymphocyte. So I want you to know these ones. We've got the phagocyte and the lymphocyte. So we are having the phagocyte and the lymphocyte. So when we start with the phagocyte, let me start on top there, looking at these ones. So I guess you are writing so that I just create more space. Just create more space. So let me create more space. Okay. Let us look at the phagocyte. So when we are looking at the phagocyte, so we are saying that these ones are what we are calling them. Don't know why these have started misbehaving. We are calling the phagocyte. What is the function of these phagocytes? We know that they fight or defend the body against diseases. So these ones, you discover that they defend. They get to do what? They get to defend the body. So they defend the body against what? They defend the body against diseases by doing what? By engulfing. So say by doing what? By engulfing, hugging the bacteria, or by doing what? By digesting. Only two ways. So by digesting or engulfing what? Germs. So germs or bacteria, or we can say foreign what? Foreign bodies. This is something that you have to know. So I want you to know this. So you now discover that the way a phagocyte is, it is like this. This is an example of a phagocyte, like this. So it has got a nucleus that is like this. So this is a nucleus. It has got a robed nucleus, a nucleus that is like this. So you discover that we did the adaptations. I guess you are able to remember the adaptations that we did. So where I told you that, so before I go to adaptations, there are certain things that I want you people to know. This one, I've told you that this is a what? This is a nucleus. It is called, we get to call this as a robed nucleus. Have you seen the way it is? So maybe some of you don't know how to label this. This is a cell membrane. So we are calling it a cell what? A cell membrane. Then these ones that are in here, these ones, this is called what? Cytoplasm. These, I guess most of you are able to do that. I just did that because I want everyone to be seeing what I'm doing and everyone to know what we are doing. So we need to understand also the adaptations. What are certain adaptations that these phagocytes have? So I've told you to say they've got a robed what? Nucleus. So discover that they've got one, there are quite a lot of adaptations. One of the adaptations is that it has got a what? It has got a lobed nucleus. It is that lobed nucleus which makes the engulfing of germs easy. So which does what? Which makes engulfing. It makes what? Engulfing. So it makes engulfing. So I'll say it makes engulfing of germs easy. Makes engulfing of germs easy. So this is an adaptation you need to understand. You also need to know that these ones, they don't have a fixed shape. They have no fixed shape, but they can change their shape and making engulfing of foreign bodies easy. So we are going to say that they have what? They have an irregular shape. They have got an irregular shape. These ones get to have an irregular what? An irregular shape. Making what? Making engulfing very easy. Making engulfing very what? Very easy and possible. So this is some things that you need to understand. This is all about the phagocyte. Phagocytes, these are white blood cells that defend the body by engulfing or digesting foreign bodies. We've got phagocytes and lymphocyte. We've got these two types. We go now to a lymphocyte. This is the last thing that we are going to do. We now go to a lymphocyte. So a lymphocyte. So when we say a lymphocyte, what do these ones do? This is the second one, second type of a white blood cell. So the function of the lymphocyte, they are both defending the lymphocyte and the phagocyte. They defend the body. So we are going to say they defend the body against what? Against diseases. So I say they defend the body against diseases. So against diseases by doing what? By producing. These ones are producing. By producing what? By producing antibodies. They are producing antibodies and what? Antitoxins. Antitoxins. These are two things that are being produced. You discover that antibodies, these are proteins that destroy germs in the body or foreign bodies. But when we go to antitoxins, so what I'm telling you is that these antibodies, when we say, okay, this is an antibody. So an antibody, we are talking about what? This is a what? This is a protein. So we are saying that this is a protein that destroys germs. That destroy. So this is a protein that destroy what? Germs. You can finish there. These are proteins that destroy germs. But when we go to an antitoxin, so when you say this is an antitoxin, what we get to mean is that these are also protein that neutralizes. So these ones are what? Are proteins that gets to do what? That gets to neutralize. So we can write the word there, neutralize. We can finish it up. They get to do what? They get to neutralize the poison from germs. So this is what you have to understand. And the way it is, the way a lymphocyte is, it is like this. This is how a lymphocyte is. It has got a big nucleus like this. To provide more room for hemoglobin, nucleus is very big. The nucleus is very big. So discover that this is a cell membrane. We know that this is a cell membrane. We know that this one is called a what? A nucleus. So it has a nucleus, the big nucleus. We also need to understand that we've got thin what? Cytoplasm. Thin cytoplasm. So these are some parts that you have to know. So this is all about what? This is what you need to understand about the lymphocyte. I guess you've learned one or two things. So this is what you have to know. I want you to know this. So let's make sure we even study through these things. So this is where we are going to end from. Thank you so much.